In this video, we are going to be talking about the Dark Angels Index. We're going to be talking about all the rules, enhancements, as well as the stratagems, and we are going to pick out the most important data cards for this time around instead of going over all of them, because that is frankly not quite necessary. If you enjoy the content, consider leaving a thumbs up and subscribing, as well as checking the links down in the description below if you want to support what I do over on Patreon or Ko-Fi. And yeah, my name is Ezekiel, and this is Empire of Wargames. So I will lead this video with one very important piece of information. The Dark Angels, in contrast to most of the other indices we've seen, have a clear theme to their army, to their rules, and how they work. So when we are going to look at the detachment rule in a second, it all makes sense, and it is actually a little bit better than I expected upon first reading this detachment rule. I really didn't like it. But now that we have a little bit more context, it is a quite strong detachment rule. So yeah, what is the theme? The theme is ignoring battle shock or using battle shock to make yourself stronger. So whenever you fail your battle shock tests, you are going to get certain benefits. You are going to be able to apply certain stratagems. Most of your enhancements reward you for failing your battle shock tests, and Grim Resolve helps to counteract failing battle shock tests as well. So you are not immune to battle shock tests. You can still fail them, and a lot of opposing armies are still going to reward them for you just simply failing. But whenever a unit of yours is battle shocked, you are still in the game. Your unit is potentially even stronger than it was before, and that is the general theme that the Dark Angels are going for. Really cool idea. I personally really like what I'm seeing so far, and yeah, let's get into the rules. And with that, we are going to start with Grim Resolve. Grim Resolve reads, while an Adeptus Astartes unit from your army is battle shocked, change the objective control characteristic of models in that unit to 1 instead of 0. It is going to help you to hold objectives regardless of if you are battle shocked or not, and it is going to help you contest objectives at least. You are not going to get a ton of OC with your units if they are battle shocked, but 1 is better than none, especially considering that a unit with OC 0 cannot hold or contest an objective. So having OC 1 is a big deal here and better than I initially expected. And next up, we are going to look at the stratagems to kind of underline the general theme of the army. If you look at Unforgiven Fury, you're looking at a 1 CP stratagem that reads, until the end of the phase, weapons equipped by models in your unit have the lethal hits ability, so critical hits auto wound. In addition, if 1 or more Adeptus Astartes units from your army are currently battle shocked, until the end of the phase, each time a model in your unit makes an attack, a successful unmodified hit roll of 5 scores a critical hit, which means you are going to have an easier time proccing lethal hits. Very strong, very useful, and yeah, it's rewarding you for being battle shocked. We also have Armor of Contempt, which is their baseline stratagem from all the chapters. Then we have Intractable, which reads, until the end of the turn, that unit is eligible to shoot and declare a charge even though it fell back this phase. Very useful, especially in a quite mixed army that is going to have a lot of melee units as well as shooty units. So this is going to help you clear up some melee fights and, allow your ranged units to shoot. Then we have Fire Discipline. This one allows you to pick 1 Adeptus Astartes unit in your shooting phase, and until the end of the phase, ranged weapons equipped by models in that unit have Assault, Heavy, and Ignores cover. Very flexible, very useful for all kinds of weapons, and yeah, rewarding your unit for just standing still and giving them the stratagem with the Heavy keyword is definitely going to be helpful. Then we have Grim Retribution, which is basically just a stratagem that allows you to shoot back after you have been shot at, which is always cool, and it kind of underlines the idea that GW wants to have a more reactive gameplay, and it's something that I talked about on Twitter quite a bit. So while we don't have alternating turns, we do have a lot of stratagems, a lot of abilities like the Termagant's one that allow us to react to what our opponent is doing, and I think that is a decent compromise. Last but not least, for the stratagems, we have Unbreakable Lines. This one reads, until the end of the turn, each time an attack is allocated to a model in your unit, subtract 1 from the damage characteristic of that attack. They did not specify to a minimum of 1. Either that is going to be somewhere in the core rules hard-coded, or it is some kind of mistake, or it is intentional. I'm not quite sure at this point anymore, and yeah, I'm just not going to comment on it. The important part is that this is disgustingly resilient, and it is always going to be useful, especially if your opponent is trying to really get rid of one specific unit, and if it has multiple wounds, and they are going to be shooting with heavier weapons, or at least damage 2 weapons, and Unbreakable Lines at that point is going to be very, very useful. Then we are talking about the enhancements, which really underline the entire aesthetic, theme, and idea of the Dark Angels. We have Shroud of Heroes. Adapters are status model only. The first time the bearer is destroyed, roll 1d6 at the end of the phase. On a 2-up, set up the bearer's unit back up with 3 wounds remaining. If that unit was battle shocked, that model comes back with full wounds. So the Shroud of Heroes is very, very interesting. You still have a 16.6% chance to, just have the Shroud of Heroes be completely useless, which I consider to be a little bit weird. I really don't like the, feels bad mechanic of rolling 1. I think consistency would have been key here. Even if the enhancements cost points, I would have made it more expensive rather than having the player roll and fail. That's just my opinion. But it is a very strong ability, especially on leader choices that you invest a lot of points in or that are just expensive natively. And yeah, decent little enhancement. Next up, we have the Heavenfall Blade. Adapters are status model only. Add 1 to the attacks characteristic, strength, and damage characteristic of the bearer's melee weapons. Strong in and of itself. And then, while the bearer is battle shocked, add 2 to the attack, strength, and damage characteristics. If your dude is some kind of Gravis captain and they are getting +2 attacks, +2 strength, and +2 damage, we are talking about some kind of god that is going to run around and deal so much damage for no reason that it's not even going to be funny. So yeah, this is no joke, especially if you are playing against opponents that are triggering a lot of battle shock tests, like for example the Tyranids. This is going to be very, very interesting. Next up, we have Stubborn Tenacity. It reads Adapters are status model only. While the bearer's leading a unit, each time a model in that unit makes an attack, add 1 to the hit roll if the bearer's unit is below starting strength. So if any model is missing, or if that specific model is alone, and if any kind of wound is missing, they are getting +1 to hit. And it reads, add 1 to the wound roll as well if the bearer's unit is battle shocked. So yeah, that is going to be extremely useful, especially on a battle shocked unit, because at that point you're punching up, you're hitting more reliably, and the entire unit is very, very effective. And the theme here seems to be that you're going to still have OC1 with your battle shocked unit, and you're going to be stronger than you were before, clearing out the opposing unit on an objective to then move on to the objective yourself. At least that is my theory. And last but not least, we have Pennant of Remembrance. Blade Guard Ancient, Primaris Ancient, or Terminator Ancient model only. While the bearer is leading a unit, models in that unit have the Feel No Pain 6-up ability. In and of itself, especially on a bigger squad, this is very, very strong. And the more wounds you have, the better it is. So if you have a lot of Terminators, for example, with a shield, remember, shields give 1 additional wound, this is going to be incredibly strong. But while that unit is battle shocked, models in that unit have a Feel No Pain of 4-up. This is going to be incredible if they are battle shocked. Now there's one thing, now that we are at the end of the base rules, to understand about battle shock. For one, you're going to be rolling battle shock every turn if your unit is below half starting strength. Then your opponent is going to have a lot of tools to trigger battle shock. It depends on the army, but usually they are going to have some shenanigans. So there is no guarantee that your units are going to be in the battle shock state all the time. It is actually going to be rather rare. And while the Dark Angels are going to, try to get battle shocked as much as they can, they don't have a lot of options, models, or abilities within their own index to trigger it themselves. There are some things. Ezekiel's book is something we're going to go over in a second, but overall you're kind of dependent on your opponent, and while all of these abilities are incredibly strong, especially if you are battle shocked, you're at the mercy of your opponent most of the time. That is something that is important to understand, because on their own, in a vacuum, all of these enhancements, most of the stratagems are all incredible. They're insane. But you're at the mercy of your opponent, which is not ideal. And for this one, I actually wanted to start with Ezekiel's data card first, simply to, prove the point. Ezekiel is a firstborn psyker, so rather squishy, because he is a leader. He only has 4 wounds. The rest is exactly what you expect. When we look at the weapons, they are nothing to write home about. The Deliverer is a pistol precision weapon with strength 4, AP -1 damage 2, which can do something, but it's not that great. But if you combine it with Mind Wipe, which also has precision, at that point you have serious firepower to take out a guard leader or maybe a Farseer or something, the squishier leader models. And I think that is a great tool to have in your army. Last but not least, we have the melee weapon, which is called Trader's Bane, Anti-Chaos, which as I said, I don't personally like, but it is what it is. It is going to be helpful against those factions. Psychic with 4 attacks, strength 6, AP minus 2, damage D3. So Ezekiel on his own has 2 things that he is going for him: his abilities and being a character killer, at least against squishy characters. Now, what are his abilities? He has the Psychic Hood, which is basic for every kind of Psycho model. He has Engulfing Fear. In your shooting phase, you can select one enemy unit within 18 inches of this model. That enemy unit must take a Battle Shock test. This is kind of sad that it has to be an enemy unit. It would be super funny if Ezekiel could force a Battle Shock test on your own units. That would have been a really cool design thing, but sadly that is not the case. What is the case though is the Wargear ability, the Book of Salvation, which reads: while this mod is leading a unit, add 1 to the attacks characteristics of melee weapons equipped by models in that unit. In and of itself, very strong, useful, doesn't need further explanation. But the second part reads: when this model is destroyed, each friendly Adeptus Astartes unit within 6 inches of this model must take a Battle Shock test. And this is one of the only instances, which I have found in this index, which forces your own models to take Battle Shock tests, but you're technically speaking still at the mercy of your opponent. You can just orchestrate it a little bit nicer, where you have as many units that you want to have Battle Shocked with, leaders that have enhancements and so on, close to Ezekiel's unit. And yeah, but you're still dependent on your opponent to kill Ezekiel. So not 100% sure how this is going to go, but Ezekiel seems like one of the more interesting characters here. And yeah, if he's cheap, I would actually consider running him. Now, when talking about characters, I have to talk about Azrael. Azrael has gotten a Primaris upgrade rather recently, and thus their data card is going to be very interesting. When we look at the leader table here, the Azrael can lead a ton of units that are all Primaris, but the options here are nigh limitless when it comes to those. When we look at the base stat line, it is exactly what we expect, although 6 wounds is on the higher side for a leader model. I will say that. When we look at the basic weapons table here, we see that the stats here are off the charts as well. So not only the wound is a little bit higher than what you'd expect, but also the AP values of his weapons. The Lion's Wrath is a anti-infantry 4-up, devastating wounds rapid fire 1 weapon with strength 8, AP minus 3, damage 2. This is going to be a very strong weapon, useful in most cases and against most things, but particularly infantry, as anti-infantry triggers devastating wounds, and rapid fire gives you a potential 3 attacks at 12 inches. So the ranged weapon is very strong. The melee weapon, meanwhile, is just incredible. We are talking about devastating wounds, so critical wounds deal mortal wounds, and then the attack sequence ends, in this case 2 mortal wounds. We have 6 attacks at strength 6, AP minus 4, damage 2. So no matter what you're going to wound with your little weapon, if that unit doesn't have an invulnerable save, it is probably going to get that damage. And if it has an invulnerable save, no matter which one it is probably going to trigger. So yeah, Azrael, just from a damage perspective, is very, very intimidating. And when we look at the abilities tab, he is a leader, he is Oath of Moment, and then he is Supreme Grand Master. While this model is leading a unit, weapons equipped by models in that unit have to sustain its 1 ability. Notice that it reads weapons, so it applies to ranged and melee weapons. Then we have Masterful Tactician, which is just going to give you an additional CP in your command phase regardless of what you do. These types of abilities are very highly valued. CP is going to be rather rare or difficult to get. Otherwise, you're only going to get 1 CP per turn, and that is that. And the other CP you're going to have to work for via those kinds of abilities. And Masterful Tactician just lets you bank on at least a couple of additional CP for the first couple of turns if you can keep Azrael alive, which is cool. Last but not least, we have the Wargear abilities, the Lion Helm. Models in the Bearer's unit have a 4-up invulnerable save. That is incredible. Then it says, in addition, once per battle, at any time, the Bearer can summon a Watcher in the Dark. When it does, until the end of the phase, models in the Bearer's unit have a Feel No Pain of 4-up against mortal wounds. So the Lion Helm is an incredible defensive tool on top of the supportive abilities that Azrael has, and on top of the offensive capabilities he has. Azrael seems like a Ultramarine to me, just from the sheer flexibility he offers, from the sheer just power in every kind of stage of the game, no matter if it's stratagems, no matter if it's just regular combat, or no matter if it's the defensive capabilities of the unit he's leading. Additionally, keep in mind that the leading unit that he has is also his kind of, defensive tool, and you want to have Masterful Tactician on the board for as long as you can, so the Lion Ham is going to help with that. Overall, Azrael seems like a incredibly well-rounded character and data card that has nothing super special going on, but that is always going to be helpful no matter which unit you're leading. And usually here I would recommend either Sternguard veterans or any kind of unit that doesn't have an invulnerable save on their own. Next up we have Belial. Belial is a character that I've seen quite a bit talked about and that I'm still hoping is going to get an upsized version. But for now, we are going to stick with this one, and the wounds as well as the toughness and so on has been upgraded, and it's great to see. Belial is going to be rather tanky. We're talking about an invulnerable save of 4-up and all the other goodies Terminators get. Deep Strike, of course, and then we have the weapons, which are just a Mastercrafted Stormbolter, which is a Stormbolter with precision and damage 2. It is going to possibly kill a guard character or something, or Eldari characters, or just units with bad saves. But overall, the precision rule here is going to be just helpful in very, very niche situations. Then we have the Sword of Silence with precision as well. At 6 attacks, strength 6, AP -2, damage 2. So if you want to have a precision leader choice, you're going to get it with this one. And notice that Ezekiel as well as Belial have a lot of precision on their data cards. This seems to be some kind of Dark Angel thing. Now, then we have the abilities. We have the Grandmaster of the Deathwing. While this model is leading a unit, each time a model in that unit makes an attack, if a critical hit is scored, that attack has the precision ability. And this is going to further enhance all your options to kill more and more and more characters. Now, notice that it just says attack, so it doesn't matter if it's ranged or if it's melee. And this is going to be very relevant, especially for units like Deathwing Knights. Last but not least, we have the Strikes of Retribution. Each time a melee attack is allocated to this model, after the attacking model unit has finished making its attacks, roll 1d6 to a maximum of d6 per attacking unit. For each 2-up, that attacking unit suffers 1 mortal wound. This is a nice to have ability, but nothing to write home about. It is possibly going to deal a couple of mortal wounds per game, but other than that, that's that. When we're talking about Belial's units that he can lead as a leader, it is mostly Terminators, if not all. So yeah, there are your options. Belial in and of itself seems like a strong option. The Deathwing Terminators themselves are a little bit weaker and boring. They seem like regular Terminators, to be completely honest. Meanwhile, Deathwing Knights are looking like a very good unit to attach Belial to. So we're going to have to wait and see. But for now, Belial seems like a decent character killer. And then we have a lot of other character models like Lazarus, like Asmodai, but I don't feel like they are worth talking about. Especially Lazarus, I'm disappointed in. His abilities as well as his weapon profiles and so on for a Primaris model and for a new cool looking model are just not enough and seem very, very boring. Next up, I wanted to quickly take a look at the Deathwing Terminator squad, which I talked about earlier. When you look at the abilities, there is really nothing special to talk about here. The Deathwing rule is technically speaking the same rule that the regular Terminators have, the upgraded ones at least, for any other marine type. So there's nothing to write home about here. And when we look at the basic stats, weapon options, and everything else that the data card has to offer, there's really nothing of note here. So the Deathwing Terminators in this specific case just have not much going for them other than, they're Deathwing Terminators. In contrast, Deathwing Knights are quite strong. We're talking about the basic statline that you've come to expect from Terminators, but the melee weapons are looking very juicy. You're hitting on 2s with either 5 attack with the Flail of the Unforgiven, with devastating wounds and sustained hits 1, and with 5 attacks it is very possible to trigger these. And we are talking about strength 6, AP -2, damage 2. That is almost character level damage here, and the weapon is just almost character level. Then we have Mace of Absolution with 4 attacks, strength 6, AP -1, damage 3. This is the ideal profile to deal with any kind of unit that is, for example, a Terminator, that is a Gravis unit, or any kind of those units. You're only going to be wounding Gravis units on 4s, but it is still better than nothing. So the Mace definitely has its use cases next to the Flail. The Flail is not just the auto-pick, but the Flail is ideal against any kind of intercessor and 2-wound infantry. So the Deathwing Knights are looking very, very interesting. When we look at the abilities further for the Deathwing Knights, we have the Inner Circle rule. Each time an attack is allocated to a model in this unit, subtract 1 from the damage characteristic of this attack. And this means that they have Disgustingly Resilient just built in, and this is particularly going to help these be even more annoying to deal with. So For now, Deathwing Knights seem like the way to go. They look cooler in my opinion anyway. And yeah, just have fun adding Belial to them or any other leader choice that you can pick. There are a ton of options you have for your Deathwing units, and yeah, go to town. These ones look very, very decent. Next up we have the Ravenwing Black Knights. These have been very popular in 9th edition, so I decided to talk about them here as well. The weapons are more or less what you expect. Plasma Talon is a little bit of a fancier rapid fire plasma weapon, which is kind of cool to have. Then we have the Black Knight combat weapon, which has been consolidated into one profile with 3 attacks, weapon skill 3, strength 5, AP -2 and damage 1, which is definitely solid but nothing particularly to write home about. What makes the Ravenwing special is the Knights of Caliban rule. Each time this unit is selected to fight, if it made a charge move this turn, until the end of the phase, melee weapons equipped by models in this unit have the anti-monster for up and anti-vehicle for up abilities. This is going to be very helpful to punch up, especially with your Black Knight combat weapon. And yeah, this is going to be just very helpful in general. But overall, the Ravenwing Black Knights have lost quite a bit because you don't have the army-wide rule in the first turn in the, Devastator Doctrine, where you can do all your movement shenanigans. You have lost a lot of just mobility through that. And especially talking about the current state of 9th edition, you could just leave that active for all eternity. So the Ravenwing Black Knights are not bad. Their profile is a little bit standard. Their ability is fine, really not that exciting. So yeah, they are looking kind of mediocre for now. And those are technically speaking all the data cards I wanted to talk about. There is the Ravenwing Dark Talon, which has a funny weapon, the Rift Cannon, which I could talk about a little bit. It is a blast devastating wounds weapon at 18 inches with D3 plus 1 attacks at strength 16, AP -4, damage 3, which is kind of funny. And while the Ravenwing Dark Talon's offensive profile is very impressive, the Hurricane Bolters are fine as well. We are talking about in rapid fire range 12 shots that are twin linked, which is not bad at all. There is also the Stasis Bomb, which either is going to prevent your opponent from advancing or falling back, or if you are really lucky on a 4-6, the unit must remain stationary until your opponent's next movement phase. This is an incredible little tool that is going to be very helpful, but for now I have my reservations about flyers and how they are going to work in 10th edition, so I'm not going to rate this one very highly. The Rift Cannon is a very unique weapon, the Ravenwing Dark Talon is a very unique flyer for that matter, and the ability is also very helpful, but it not only depends on points here in this case, but it also depends on the flyer rules and how they are going to be implemented in the end and how it just feels to pilot them. And while there are other units and data cards that are certainly interesting, if you want to tell me about them, if you want to tell me your opinion about, for example, a Landspeeder Vengeance and so on, please drop all of that information down in the comments below. It's not only going to help me understand these units better and see your perspective, but it's also going to help other fellow Dark Angels players, maybe new players, and so on. So I'd be very thankful for that. If you have any questions regarding any of the data cards, if I've misunderstood anything or said something wrong, please drop all of that down in the comments below, and I'm going to try to, fix it for the next video and learn to read a little bit more closely. Other than that, I hope this video was insightful, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.